Working as an FBI special agent was my dream job. My whistleblowing was apolitical and in the spirit of upholding my oath. Nonetheless, the FBI cynically elected to close ranks and attack the messenger.
The FBI will crush you. This government will crush you and your family if you try to expose the truth about things that they are doing that are wrong. We are all examples of that.
Joining us now are Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle. Thanks for joining us, fellas.
FBI whistleblowers Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle both join us now. Gentlemen, so glad to have you on the program. Thank you for your testimony.
We need more folks like you, and I'm sure more people are going to be from your background are going to be giving you guys more intel as you're sharing that with the rest of us. We can kind of see that this is becoming normal for them to be held accountable, because I think especially an institution that we pay their salaries, they need to be held accountable.
I think a lot of people do share our beliefs and convictions. I think they just aren't at the point that Steve and I and others have gotten to. They're too afraid.
Thank you so much for being a guest here on PBD Podcast.
Thanks for having us.
How big is that bloody flag that Steve's got? It's a stone wall of his house. Lots of love, guys. Thanks very much for joining us.
Steve Friend, Garrett O'Boyle, thank you for being with us this morning. More importantly, thank you for speaking out. We appreciate it.
You're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and pursue the truth with FBI whistleblowers and founding suspendables Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast. Hopefully, I got an error message when we tried to launch live today, but I'm looking at the chat here on rumble.com/AmRadPod, and it looks like we are, in fact, rolling. So hopefully you're all with us and up to speed today. It's 10:30 on the Eastern Seaboard, Tuesday. It's a brand new week, and we're glad to be here. If you have not already, make sure that you follow what Eric Jason, the moderator of the chat on Rumble, is telling you to do, and that is to smash the thumbs up and give us a follow. Subscribe if you want to do that here on Rumble. All that goes to support the program. Also, subscribe to the audio format on iTunes and Spotify, iHeart, whatever the platform of choice is for you to listen to us, because we drop the shows there after we get done here if Rumble cooperates with us. And we do that on Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, as always. So it's a brand new week. Today we're talking about my house rules. It's like more like my house, my rules. In this house, we say gay and retarded. In this house, you're going to follow my rules. And really, the genesis for this was my kiddos finally got done with spring break. They're back at school. And I started to think of how that lines up with what we're seeing now, what we're like 9 weeks into a Trump administration. And the fact of the matter is, you kind of relax the rules when the kids are on break, right? Like you extend the bedtime a little bit. Maybe you give them a little bit more privileges so they can play their video games. But then we expect to snap back into routine as soon as that Monday morning rolls around and we got school. And I think the kids kind of just relaxed and they didn't expect the rules. So there's going to be some new rules that have been put back into place that aren't really necessarily new today. So we're going to talk about how we're getting back to fiscal responsibility when it comes to cutting back on the Department of Education and maybe the Postal Service, some accountability as it comes to fake protests as they're going on, or fake rallies, the fake figures and numbers of the participation. And we're going to expose that. Finally, going to hold media, legacy media, to account for their misuse of language, things that Garrett and I like to pound on, the fact that they're able to manipulate your state of mind, your approach to things by talking about language. And we also have food stamp accountability. It's Snapgate 2025. So that, and we got a bunch. I pulled up a whole bunch of stories we want to get to, want to get more people educated as we come about on the American Radicals Podcast. But before we do, let's make sure that we thank the underwriting sponsor of the day, which is going to be the M-Clip Company. Go to m-clip.com, m-clip.com, and use promo code SUSPENDABLE to get 10% off on the money clips that they have there. An American company, family-owned, more than 2 decades. They're luxury goods. They will not break the bank. You'll actually have some money to put back into the money clip. You can get your initials monogrammed on them, your favorite baseball team, make it look like it's leather. You can even get the Suspendables merch where it has our emblem and our logo, all of it 10% off if you use promo code SUSPENDABLE at m-clip.com. So without further ado, on this vaunted Suspendiversary, 30 months unpaid, indefinitely suspended forever. Let's bring on my co-host, Garrett O'Boyle. Congratulations, sir. How does it feel? 30 months.
It feels like it did yesterday. So, pretty good. But I will say it feels better than it did 29 months and 30 days ago. So, progress, as our Canadian friends like to say.
Every day is a Monday in the experience, the lived experience of an indefinitely suspended forever FBI whistleblower, my friend Garrett O'Boyle. So
How
you
many
have
years do you think we've aged in the last 30 months, Steve?
666.
I like the layers there.
All right. You're a father. I'm a father. You homeschools, you don't necessarily have the spring break or the summer break, getting the snap back into reality.
Every day is spring break, Steve.
And I had this experience, coming up on the end of the break. They've been off for a week and a half, and I thought it was really an appropriate comparison to the way we've snapped back in the last 9 weeks to a different presidential administration. The last 4 years, they've been kind of living on vacation, right? Spending lots of money, doing
Using
whatever
that
they
auto
wanted,
pen.
looking at the American people as a piggy bank. So to launch us off today, let's get the
Oh boy.
Senate Minority Leader's thoughts.
Chucky Schumer.
And you know what their attitude is? I made my money all by myself. How dare your government take my money from me? I don't want to pay taxes. Or I built my company with my bare hands. How dare your government tell me how I should treat my customers, my the land and water that I own, or my employees? They hate government. Government's a barrier to people. A barrier to stop them from doing things. They want to destroy.
I like how they got the music to try to shut him
rush
up.
him off the stage, saying you're giving the Oppo research, all the commercials for the next midterm election sequence. You're giving them everything. This is a worldview that Chuck Schumer and the other communists have, but they've felt more and more comfortable vocalizing it now. And now the rules are back in place. You can't say that anymore, Chuck. We have to ramp up the music to try to mute that.
I like how even Whoopi is like trying to, hey, somebody yank him off. He's gonna ruin it all for us. But look at this, Steve. Of course, there's an ad up here. Stand by. Look at this headline. Chuck Schumer's net worth exceeds 81 million. You know what, Chuck? I don't want to hear anything from you about money, about my money, about what the government's doing with my money. Because guess what? It is my money. Well, not right now, not technically. Any money I have is money that kind people have given me. And but still, it's what's the salary? It's like 250,000 a year, roughly, something like that. So tell me, Chuck, how'd you get such a gross net worth of 81 million?
While maintaining a household in Washington, D.C. and New York, some very high, expensive areas. I mean, could it be because he's got some insider trading going on? I don't know. Nobody's ever really dug into Chuck Schumer, but he has made a career there. And he's definitely had a career of being able, especially in the last couple of years when the rules were a little bit more lax, to articulate things like, you didn't build that, which was one of the most devastating remarks that Barack Obama made that the Republicans failed to take advantage of in 2008 to stop that Marxist from becoming president.
I'm sure they got on Hannity with some type of soundbite, though.
Well, over the weekend also, I don't know if you saw this in your area, but there were some postal workers that were protesting where I live because there's now been threats to cut jobs at the Postal Service because new rules, you have to turn a profit if you're going to actually be this quasi-government, quasi-private organization. And there was an agreement made, this reporting from the Associated Press, that the post office was agreeing to work with Doge on some reforms, and they were planning to cut 10,000 workers. So the workers were very displeased. And it was a funny experience for me because we were driving home from the beach. Yes, no apologies.
Man, you can go to the beach in March? Come on. The ice barely melted here on the lake that's nearby us.
And as we're wont to do in the friend household, we're talking about the Bill of Rights in the car. And I was reviewing the First Amendment with my eldest son, and he was trying to stay awake. And I said, the First Amendment says you can have free speech. So as we drove by the postal workers who I said, look, they're freedom of assembly. They're saying that they have a job and they're entitled to that job. I disagree. And I rolled down the window and screamed, I love FedEx as we drove by. But the Postal Service is now agreeing to work with the Doge. So the Doge is going to assist the USPS, United States Postal Service, with addressing, quote, big problems at the $78 billion a year agency that is completely and wholly unnecessary because I love FedEx. And they sometimes have struggled to stay afloat. And I did find the Rich McCormick video of his address with the U.S. Postmaster General, who resigned yesterday, as an update to the story. But it is fun because Rich McCormick is kind of I don't know, not my favorite person.
Yeah,
but
we like to use him as a punching bag around here.
He did hold the U.S. Postmaster General accountable for his failure of leadership here. This was last year.
You, sir, do not get an A grade. You cannot give yourself that grade.
I just did.
You can't. You can't grade your own paper, sir. I've been to medical school.
Well, then-
I got my MBA. You can't. I'm sorry. You are graded by the United States people, and they don't use your service anymore. You bankrupt.
That is not true.
You
That is
bankrupt
not
this
true,
through
sir.
your
My
reputation
business is
only.
growing.
Through your
Our
reputation,
business is growing.
you are responsible for the fall of the Postal Service
Now,
and the
this
lack of
Congress-
accountability.
This Congress is responsible for the
doesn't-
fall of the Postal
oh, so it's
Service.
Congress's-
I am trying to fix
On
the
your
Postal
watch,
Service.
with all the AI.
Before my watch, the same stuff
With
happened.
all
worse.
the AI, with all the computer systems, you're worse than if I took
You're
a
talking
horse
to yourself
and picked up the mail and delivered it 2 miles down the road.
That is the greatest image for those listening of the Postmaster General, Mr. DeJoy, who is covering his ears because he doesn't want to hear the reality that the congressman is bringing to him. And he did make a remark that I did like about how it's the fault of Congress. And I agree with that because Congress stinks. But it is worth noting that the 10,000 Postal Service employees who might be cut here, that's not unprecedented. Who is president in 2021, Garrett?
Joseph Biden.
Robinette Biden. Don't forget the middle name. The agency cut 30,000 workers in 2021.
Okay,
They
that's
currently employ 640,000.
Yipes.
So we're not talking about a huge percentage of people that are at risk of losing their position, particularly when the mission set. I mean, why do we have it? Right. I mean, there's all these studies that have been done that we need to have the Postal Service that's propped up by the American taxpayer to deliver all the spam mail, right? All of the junk mail. And the reason that we have junk mail, which is funded by the taxpayer a lot of times, is to make people feel less lonely when we deliver junk mail. So they feel like they're getting something in the mail every day. Again, it's giving people a job. It's a jobs program to then worry about people's feelings, or at least they're trying to use that as an argument. When in essence, if I needed to send something, I can just pay for it and have it there tomorrow from FedEx, UPS, whatever your provider is.
There's a couple things here for me. One, I like my mailman who just happens to be a woman, which is totally fine with me in 2025. We don't have the Pony Express anymore. So that leads into the next thing I think of when I think of the post office. The history of it is pretty cool. There's an old ad for the Pony Express, and it was basically a recruitment poster, and it's talking about death and getting the mail places on times, and it was looking for young men, well, boys even, like teenage age boys, and I forget the exact weight, but they had to be like 150 pounds or less, because you've got these mail bags that you're taking from point to point, and you got to ride quickly to get to the next changing station to get a new horse, and there's going to be all sorts of danger and Indians and all this. Very cool, very cool. But fast forward to where we are now. You mentioned 640,000 employees, and UPS, or I mean USPS, they're not the greatest. Granted, even FedEx or UPS, they'll lose a package from time to time. But when you look at the model, the government model just spends money and loses money, where FedEx, UPS, even DHL, they are in it to make money, and especially for their shareholders, and they are held accountable if they're not. And then here you have Mr. DeJoy, which is a very prophetic image of him covering his ears, because this is the picture of most federal workers right now. When you mention Elon Musk, Donald Trump, or Doge, they want to cover their ears. They want to shut it out and say, no, you can't do that. I'm entitled to all this. No, you aren't. And as much as we dislike Mr. McCormick over here, I don't know who I like less in that clip. Mr. DeJoy or Mr. McCormick. They both are garbage.
The covering of the ears was my children when I told them it was bedtime because it was a school night.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what it was. 10,000 out of 640,000 is about 1%.
And speaking of FedEx, Steve, have you ever seen this? Have you ever seen this logo?
Oh, are you going to talk about the arrow?
The arrow.
Yes, that you can't unsee once you see it.
You cannot unsee it once you see it. And I don't know how long ago it was, at least a decade, when somebody first pointed that out to me. And now whenever I see any FedEx logo, I just see the arrow. But also, if we're talking about government and we're talking about things that need to be shipped from place to place, what service does the FBI use, Steve? Do you know?
FedEx, including for drugs, who they trust FedEx more than agents because agents have to double up, but the one FedEx guy can get that cocaine to the lab.
Mm-hmm. They also trust FedEx with classified information, which they mail from time to time too. And that's totally okay for them to do and say, well, we packaged it correctly, so then it's okay because we said so. But the government doesn't even use the government system.
We have a gigantic contract with FedEx. Yeah, I don't trust the Postal Service. The government doesn't trust the Postal Service. And I think it should probably be defunct, but 10,000 firings I'm on board for. And it was also fun to scream at the protesting Postal Service workers who are out on a Sunday because the mail doesn't come on Sunday, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas FedEx does work. The Department of Education is something else that was getting scaled back. I know with Linda McMahon, I mean, the timeline we were on in the multiverse where Mrs. WWE is in charge of Department of Education. It's fun. And the Guardian's reporting how there's an executive order that came out to scale back on Department of Education. It's sort of weird because the Department of Education is basically just a payout to teachers' unions. It was established by Jimmy Carter. It's not like George Washington established this department. It's hardly been there. It's hardly had any success, as we'll get to in a second. But cutting it out with an executive order is going to be hard. It's more of a directive that's come from the Trump administration. And I think they're hoping there's going to be follow through with legislation. We'll see if that ever comes to bear. It seems like the closest thing to immortality is a government program or a department. So it's going to be a hard lift. But the directive that came from the Trump administration seeks to transfer much of the federal government's education authority to individual states, while maintaining key programs like Pell Grants. So we're still going to give free college out and student loans. So hardly a panacea of a solution, but I think giving more authority to the states is optimal. And in light of that, I was able to get a couple of examples of just failure. For all the talking about the success of the Department of Education, this is how the spring breakers that we're getting.
Who did the colonists fight in the Revolutionary War?
Oh, God. In the Revolutionary War?
It was, I don't know if this is right. I mean, it sounds so stupid. Was it the Spanish? Wait, what are your majors?
Business? Biology.
Okay. Elementary education. Oh. What shape is the U.S. Pentagon building?
Isn't it just a square?
How many U.S. senators are there?
6, 7. 2
for each state. How many amendments are in the Bill of Rights?
There's a lot. I know 17.
Who won the Civil War?
Oh, shoot, it's East or West, right?
Well, it's the Civil War, so it's the civilians versus whoever was in power. How many justices are on the Supreme Court?
Justices. So, like when you say that, like you mean like the FBI?
Who was on the $100 bill?
Oh, I know.
Abraham Lincoln?
Nope.
Abraham Lincoln? Come on, bro.
That's the First Amendment. What's the second?
Right to vote?
Name 3 states that border Canada. We'll just do one per person.
Asia.
I didn't know Canada had a.
So the elementary school teacher aspiring was unable to answer who we fought in the Revolutionary War. Congratulations, Department of Education, $200 billion a year.
I know I rail on this quite a bit, Steve, but get your kids out of government freaking school. Get your kids as far away from government anything as you can. If a clip like that doesn't do it for you, I don't know what will. I wish she would have asked the biology major, what is a woman? I would have loved to hear that answer. Because she was a woman, or appeared to be, and I bet you she wouldn't have been able to articulate a cogent answer because she would be afraid of getting canceled, even though she's a biology major. Get them away from government freaking everything. You must. If you really want to make America great again, if you want to save this nation, if you want to beat the drum of whatever talking point from the quote unquote conservative side, which remember is a bunch of 1990s and 2000s era Democrats like Tulsi Gabbard and Donald Trump, they're conservative now. So if you want to match their talking points, you got to get your kids away from government, or there's not going to be in America much longer. I think we
Did
just
you just
lost
lose me
you.
or I lost you? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think we're back too.
Okay, hopefully the East and West Civil War did not bring down the internet. And and we're talking fiscal responsibility on the education. I saw this story. It did not get as much attention as it should have because it comes from Sky News, which is in Australia, which was formerly a relatively free country, but now is probably more aligned with China than with the West. And they're really upset about the fact that we're not funding any more of their colleges. This is a true and accurate statement. Prime Minister of Australia urged to call an emergency meeting after the Trump administration cuts funding to 7 Australian universities. Why, pray tell, are we giving them money? The administration's move came after U.S. agencies asked Australian researchers to justify why they should continue to receive our grants. Right? I think that's a reasonable question. I don't know why we give them to begin with. The surveys they received asked several questions, including whether the researchers had received funding from China and if their universities had recognized only 2 sexes, male and female. The cut of funding could leave $600 million hole in their efforts of research in the university level in Australia. So we were sending $600 million to colleges in Australia, which should never happen under any circumstances. And yet, the way that we're going to pull it back is we're going to say, you might be close to China. I don't think that matters.
Right.
But if whatever you got to do, or you don't know the difference between a man and a woman, whatever you got to do to claw back the money, I think they're being creative. I would like them to say, that's our money, not yours, and we shouldn't be outsourcing research to universities in other countries. I don't know if we should necessarily be outsourcing research to universities, period, because the research should be done at the cost of the universities if it's worthwhile doing, right?
100%. Especially on the heels of that clip you just played with these college students who don't know basic, simple civics of their own nation, and we're sending 600 million to Australia. Okay, how much are we sending to universities in England or Scotland or Spain or wherever else in the world? There shouldn't be one dime sent anywhere else, especially with the clear crisis that we're having in our own nation regarding what students know and don't know. But 600 million, I would also like to know when that program started, when we first started funding foreign universities, how much money were we giving? And now it's up to 600 million. Guarantee you it didn't start there, but here we are now at 600 million, and now it's a crisis for Australia. And like you said, we shouldn't have to give any excuse other than you never should have gotten a dime in the first place, and we're going to stop that. That's all you get, because you're not entitled to any of it.
It always goes one way. If we have a disaster in this country, are other countries sending us foreign aid? Are other countries giving us grants? It's always one way. And it has to end because this is inconsistent with the way and the history that nations have operated for all of time until we came to this conclusion that somehow we have to give away our treasure and sometimes our blood for things that do not involve us whatsoever. And as a result, we have kids on the beach who don't know who fought in the Civil War, let alone what the shape of a pentagon is, who presume to be of post-secondary education level, people who are in college, which means they matriculated through a K through 12 education, and they learned nothing. I mean, you have a small child, they learn where to put the game, like the circle piece into the
Into the different
hole,
the
right?
octagon shape, the circle shape,
Know those
pentagon shape.
of 18 months, but apparently we're regressing beyond that. I mean, I'm even thinking about, my police academy was at a community college. It was at a technical school. Well, you're learning some skills there that not necessarily being taught at a scholastic level. There was a barber, there was a dessert confectionery, there was some childcare classes. But I remember some people that were just going to regular classes. And I was kind of like walking to where my destination was at the law enforcement portion. And I heard one student ask another student, "Where are you going?" And he replied, "Math." And I thought, I haven't been to math since grammar school.
Yes.
Why is this being taught? And probably got a Pell Grant to get there, or
Mhm.
a loan in order to get that level of arithmetic.
Right, going to 8th grade math in 13th grade or 14th grade when they're at the tech school. Uh, it's an old favorite tagline here on AmRad, funding your own demise. We haven't said it in a while, but this is, whether it's the Department of Education, whether it's sending money to foreign universities, you are funding your own demise, and it must stop. Doge needs to be unleashed even more, and that ties into all sorts of other issues like rogue judges and different sorts of injunctions and all sorts of things going against what the collective will of the people was when they voted for Donald Trump and his mandate in November.
All right, let's pivot away from the cuts and talk about the resistance, the hashtag resistance, and the champions of that movement are polar opposite ends of the age spectrum. You got Alexandria occasionally using her prefrontal cortex, and Bernie Sanders, who, if memory serves, had a heart attack when he ran for president in 2020, and everybody just moved on and thought, oh, he's probably still good to go with. And they had a rally in Denver, Colorado, because they are the movement. This is the grassroots, nothing astroturf whatsoever, until you actually have some new rules where we're able to say these things and use technologies, which is what Zero Hedge was identifying. Tyler Durden, favorite of the American Radicals podcast. Drone footage shows a large crowd at U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders when he spoke to Denver's Civic Center. Sanders wrote on X that 34,000 people came out. And it's the largest rally since 2008. Remember when Barack Obama had the Parthenon columns behind him? But a data analyst, whose name is Tony Saruga, exposed just how staged the party rally was. Here we go again. He said there's 20,000 unique devices. They basically dropped a geofence on the area and found 20,000, not 30 or 34,000. 84% of those devices had attended 9 or more Kamala Harris rallies, BLM rallies, Antifa rallies. And when I say rallies, I mean riots, pro-Hamas, pro-Palestine protests. And 31%, so 1 in 3 of those 20,000 devices had attended over 20 rallies/riots. So they're kind of professional protesters. So almost all of that 84% were likely working with one of 5 groups, which they were able to, through technology, Garrett, identify 5 groups that are basically farming out professional rally/protest/riot attendance for these organizations.
The world is a stage. We started seeing a lot of this during the various campaigns, Trump and Kamala. Some information along these lines started coming out. And of course, because let's go back, Steve, where does it always go? It always goes back to COVID. Remember Joe Biden's campaign rallies? They've got the circles in the grass and they got like a total
Drive-through movie theater where they're honking.
And it's all fake. And this is one of the benefits of the double-edged sword that is modern technology. In a lot of ways, it's a distraction. It's a deviance device. It's easier than ever to go into all sorts of morally corrupt and bankrupted avenues because technology has made it very easy. And then on the positive, it's very easy for me to go and look up the Greek translation of whatever Bible verse I'm studying right at the moment, which is great because I don't know Greek, but I can read English and I can read translations. And then on top of that, you've got people like how many internet sleuths are there these days? It doesn't take much scrolling on Twitter to find them, and they are digging and coming up with all sorts of information that is beneficial to the collective conscience. And every day that goes by, more and more people are starting to pay attention. More and more people are catching on that government is a big charade and a lie, and they just want to keep their hand on your throat as long as they can. And while we have some semblance of freedom and free flowing technology like this, well, you're able to learn that, oh, look, the Democrats they don't really have 34,000 people. They got a bunch of paid agitators that go from rally to rally. I don't know how much they're getting, but if you're going to 9, 10 of these things, it must be lucrative enough. well, and maybe your ideology is so much aligned that you're willing to be part of the charade. You're just a pawn being used so they can say, oh, look at all the numbers. Oh, look at how many people are against quote unquote Trumpism. No, don't you remember what happened when he got elected? Millions and millions of people overwhelmingly voted for him.
So to connect these professional rally goers or riot attendees to something else that we're seeing a lot of, and those are like these Tesla burnings, right? And I think there's been a reasonable concern that there could be an organized effort behind them, right?
For
That there
sure.
could be funding behind it, and that's conspiracy. And is it potentially domestic terrorism? I think there's an ideology behind it. They're trying to push forward some sort of change. Um, Now, I want to say something wildly controversial, and but not. It's actually just true. um, the efforts that are made there, I can't help but notice it's a bunch of like the worst people on earth, right? Like the
Yeah.
liberal white women.
Uh-huh.
What is the difference between that and 5 years ago during the Summer of Love, when you had some of the very organizations that were named in that Zero Hedge piece, the BLM and Antifa riots that occurred around the country? How much funding went into that to get people to attend, whereas how much of it was organic? And they certainly caused a lot of damage and loss of life and actually impacted political change. They got private corporations, Fortune 500 companies, to donate millions of dollars to their cause. Basically, it was a shakedown. Don't burn down our headquarters, and we'll give you millions of dollars so that you can continue to go into the street and push uh, anarchy and communism ultimately. That seems to me to be domestic terrorism, and we just let it go because shortly thereafter there was a new president in town and he wasn't interested in it. But the statute of limitations has not expired on that. And is it just it's a different class of people because their message happened to be for those who have a darker hint of skin color than the Tesla? And I'm not saying don't go after the Tesla people, but where's the task force still that should be stood up to go after the BLM riots?
100%. It doesn't take us much to harken back to those days. We were both active FBI agents at the time. I know for us in Wichita, even in Kansas City as a whole, it was very clear that if those type of things came to our jurisdiction, we were not going to tolerate it. There was very little where I was in Wichita, a couple small little rallies and organizations, but we were tuned in right off the bat, working with Wichita PD to make sure if there was anything that came up, we would take a look at it from a federal perspective initially. Luckily or thankfully for us in such a small city, nothing really rose to those levels. But I think it's also important to share something like this. This comes from Cornell's law.cornell.edu, which is another favorite legal archive or source that I go to often, but it pulls directly from 18 USC 2331 sub 5, which gives us the legal definition of what domestic terrorism is. And it says the term domestic terrorism means activities that involve acts dangerous to human life that are a violation of the criminal laws of the United States or of any state, appear to be intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, to influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion, or to affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping, and occur primarily within the territorial jurisdiction of the United States. There's a few important things to tune in here from understanding the statute, the elements of the crime, as it were. Now, there's no official domestic terrorism statute, but you use a definition like this in the context of crimes that are already established, that Congress has already ratified. And it's important to pay attention to words like or. So in this definition at the end, it says, or to affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, etc. So it doesn't have to be all of these things. It just has to be one of them. And guess what, everybody? It's a crime to go and destroy Teslas because it's already a property crime. But since it is tied into Elon and anti-Trumpism and anti-government, because remember, Steve, during the Biden eras, what was the anti-government violent extremism? It was people like you and me, people who listen to the American radicals because we're all racists and bigots and trans deniers and vaccine deniers. But now the people overwhelmingly said, yeah, we don't agree with that. This is by definition domestic terrorism. I think there's a very strong case to be made for that.
The definition of an anti-government, anti-authority, violent extremist, which the FBI co-authored a strategic intelligence assessment with the Department of Homeland Security in 2021, states that an agave is someone with a perception of government overreach, negligence, or illegitimacy. So, or implying all, no, just one. So if you have a perception of government overreach, like, hey, you shouldn't shut down my private business. Hey, you shouldn't shut down my church and then open the strip club. I think that might be taking it too far. That makes you an anti-government, anti-authority, violent extremist, ergo domestic terrorist who can be investigated via an assessment. And we know through that process that the presumption is guilty, not innocent until proven guilty. You were always guilty, and maybe you're just a low intelligence retard who we can confuse or delude or influence in order to agree to do your worst ideas, which you're not predisposed or capable of doing. And then we can put you in a cage and say that we got a domestic terrorist. That's pretty dark. But let's talk about some babies then to cheer ourselves up, Garrett.
I love babies.
I got a bunch of them. Let's start with the one that I think is good, and then we'll get into some of the language manipulation. Again, the anti-government, anti-authority, violent extremists, there's a lot of language that went in there to change the definition of domestic terrorist. But before we get to that, I saw this and I was happy, so I'm going to share it. It comes from Catholic Vote. Apparently, they're going to do a sweeping review from the Department of Health and Human Services to review infant formula safety and nutrition.
Interesting.
So the Food and Drug Administration is reviewing nutrient content of infant formula, increasing testing for heavy metal contaminants, and encouraging companies to develop new infant formulas, I guess, if they have lots of heavy metal in contaminants. I didn't know that they had them in there. I would think that the rules should have stated that, but maybe we've just been derelict in that review going forward. And the reason that they might be derelict is because we're having a really hard time defining what it is to be an unborn person. I've talked about the language. We've done multiple episodes on it, but just as a parallel example, does it sound tasteful? Does it sound good to say that you drove your old dog to the veterinarian and paid that veterinarian to inject him with poison and murder your dog?
Doesn't sound good.
No.
Sounds
Does
like
it sound good that I terminated my dog? I put my dog down. It sounds a little bit better. I euthanized my dog. I mean, it sounds scientific, but still, we put him to sleep, right? Right. So
He was
similarly,
struggling. He's better off this way.
and it's a dog, so it's a little bit different than a person. But so you get to infanticide and baby murder, which is what we call it accurately, and that doesn't sound very good or very tasteful. So we had to evolve the language, and it then transitioned and evolved into termination. It's Terminator. It's kind of he's the bad guy. Let's not do that. Abortion. It means the mission never actually launched, right? We just aborted it, but then that sounded too aggressive, so that it became women's health care.
Women's health. Yep.
It was pro-choice, and now it's reproductive justice.
Oh, yeah.
And if you oppose that, you are anti-women, right?
And you're anti-justice, clearly.
And then you also have to redefine what it is that you're doing and who the object is, who the individual is. So I have two contrasting articles here from the same source, the New York Times. At one time, it was a newspaper. And this is right after the Dobbs versus Jackson decision was, I don't know if it was leaked, have to look at the time of it, or if it had actually been, it was a couple weeks difference. And as a side note, it's pretty clear John Roberts leaked it, right?
It's got to be.
That's why there's never been any progress made on that. So New York Times at the time, a few years back, from Dobbs versus Jackson, headline, is a fetus a person? An anti-abortion strategy says yes. Oh, you mean the pro-life strategy?
Yeah.
The anti-baby murder strategy? Is a fetus a person? And I want to contrast that with what we're seeing now when we're going to be really, really worried about the illegal aliens, not migrants, not visitors from another world, illegal aliens, not undocumented people. The New York Times, though, undocumented women ask, will my unborn child be a citizen?
Steve, what a contrast here.
Progress. I mean, are they on our side now, Garrett?
clearly no, but oh man, it's such a stark. Oh, dude, I love that. I love it. I love it. Back to back, hitting them over the head with the truth right here because they want to twist and manipulate the language. When you were talking about the progress of how they use language, even to the termination era where it was, oh, we're going to have to terminate the pregnancy. The mother has elected to terminate the pregnancy. Even that then changed to terminate the fetus because the language is always being shaped and molded and manipulated until the truth of the language helps their cause. Because here, that last one you pulled up, it said undocumented women. Okay, well, one, you're twisting the language already because you told us not to assume genders. So what's a woman? We should start there. And then also, what do you mean by undocumented? Because we have laws still, and
People aren't illegal, Garrett,
of
unless they
course
cross
not.
our border.
Yes. So you're already violating our laws when you come here, quote unquote, undocumented. You're illegal. You are an illegal immigrant. And I saw recently something about removing the I, or didn't we talk about it recently? Removing the I from immigrant to just get to migrant. It's another way they've manipulated the language. But then they say the unborn child. Oh, so it is a person. You're admitting that it is a person now.
And in
But
fact, by saying that their unborn child is not a legal citizen, you're unpersoning them. You're referring to them as not human, Garrett.
of
You're
course,
bad.
I'm bad. We're bigots and filled with hate over here, Steve.
um, and on the topic of baby murder, that's not a transition I really embrace making. But let's talk about how murder pays in America, and this needs to be brought out, particularly when we have new rules. Let's stop paying people so much money for murder. This is a report that I found. It's from all.org. Planned Parenthood Federation of America president. Her name is Alexis McGill Johnson. So we're going to call her Johnson because the patriarchy always wins, particularly when your last name is Johnson. She earned $904,014 in the last reporting year, which was 2022-2023. And compared to her 2021 salary of $683,697. So she got almost a 33% increase in pay year over year.
Wow.
Planned Parenthood Los Angeles, which is one of the subsidiaries, has 24 facilities. Their affiliate made $155 million that year, and its CEO was compensated $875,000. Now, outside of the context of like a chief executive officer for a Fortune 500 company, like an enormous company, like if you're in charge of Boeing or Coca-Cola or Disney, unless you're putting out Snow White and getting crushed, you would expect to see some sort of compensation in that area, maybe even into the millions of dollars. But if your job, we've established here that Planned Parenthood doesn't even provide the services now. They're cutting back on the services. They basically just do advocacy. They go out and advertise what their ideology is. That's a lot of money. Like that's up there with what you would expect from a very successful high-end salesman to be making on commission, which I think is probably inappropriate. You're selling baby death.
Absolutely. And you can think back to a number of stories. There was the undercover journalist method. I think it was in the DC area because I think FBI WFO took up a case against the pro-life. So
the Center for Medical Progress, where they face
yes.
down. Yes.
And so it boils down to language, it boils down to truth, it boils down to righteousness. Who defines what that is? Because when we look at Planned Parenthood, when we look at just these New York Times articles that we had up, everything is being manipulated. And this advocacy that Planned Parenthood now stomps their foot into is a huge part of the problem. I saw a clip yesterday. I forget where it was. It was at some university, not in Australia, but right here at home. And there was, because we still have a First Amendment here, it was a pro-life booth in one of the common areas at this university. And it was an unhinged, it was a man. And he ends up like flipping all their pamphlets, and he's yelling and ranting and raving. Probably the type of person who would go and try to firebomb a Tesla dealership. And he is raging against the truth because he has bought the satanic lie that is being pushed from a place like Planned Parenthood, which, by the way, means that it's being pushed from a place like your government because of all the funding that the government has given them over the years. And he is so anti-truth and righteousness, which comes from one place, comes from God, the eternal almighty Yahweh God, because human flesh does not get to dictate what is true, what is right, what is just. That's already been established. That's been established before time. And now we live in this fallen world, and flesh lusts after flesh. It lusts after the things it wants. And so you have a guy who hates the truth and who hates righteousness and who is all for the baby murder and is going to yell and rant and rave and start flipping and destroying things because his flesh, he wants to cave to his flesh instead of what is true and what is truly right.
If you're an organization, you're paying your leadership almost $1 million. And that's the CEO. And I know that some of the underlings, the entourage surrounding that CEO are probably making pretty healthy salaries. And their performance is something like this one, which comes from the Gothamist, which is an excellent name
That's
for
a
a
great name.
website, right? Planned Parenthood, Greater New York, cited rising operational costs and insufficient Medicaid reimbursements, government, as key factors for closing their only Manhattan clinic. And if you remember, we covered Bevelyn Williams. She was arrested for her 2020 protest outside this location, and she was sentenced to 41 months in prison. And that was a misuse of the FACE Act, right? Because again, the Free Access to Clinical Entrances Act, she was basically praying outside, wasn't doing any sort of obstruction. That law is completely weaponized. And under the guise of domestic violent extremist or maybe anti-government, anti-authority violent extremist, Bevelyn Williams kind of fits the bill, right? So she was put into prison for 41 months. Donald Trump pardoned her and others. I think it was 22 pro-life activists were convicted of FACE Act violations, and they were pardoned by Donald Trump because new rules. We're not going to be misapplying this, and we're not going to be going after people for nonviolent First Amendment protected activity, whereas we're going to ignore the firebombing of crisis pregnancy centers. Now, all that to say for that article, you're having to close locations because you've run this operation so poorly, but yet you're taking all the money and salary, money from the taxpayer, money from donations. I think that their idea and understanding of what constitutes success is completely polar opposite. You would have to be a profitable organization in order to justify that salary.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and it's not. It's a leaker. It's leaking money. But it's the agenda. The agenda is what matters here.
All right. So under my house, you're going to live by my rules. Let's talk Snapgate.
Oh, yeah.
2025. And I think it's been talked about a bunch. We didn't really cover it. But basically, it comes out that if you're on food stamps, you can't use the food stamps to buy, I don't know, Mountain Dew Red anymore, right? You can't buy sugary drinks. That's the push. And there was a argument that was coming around saying, well, this is a freedom issue.
Dude.
Is it an infringement on freedom for you to make choices for your kids on what they eat when you're buying the food for them?
Of course not. Of course not. Again, this is language. This is anti-truth. And the push you saw, especially on, I guess for us, for me, it was over on Twitter because you got all these quote unquote conservative influencers coming out with this freedom issue. And then what happened, Steve? What's the rest of the story there?
Oh, they're paid to do it. It's almost like you can just, integrity is only a problem for those who have it. And they sold their influence in order to talk about freedom. And I found this piece, which I did think presented some good and factual information for those who are still clinging on to the idea of you should have the freedom to buy as much Mountain Dew Red as you can using your taxpayer funded food stamps. even though it's not good for you because, America and freedom. This comes from American Enterprise Institute, Center on Opportunity and Social Mobility. It's just so much government speak.
Yes.
But it's about sugary beverage consumption among SNAP recipients. SNAP stands for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Supplemental means
Yeah,
extra.
exactly.
Nutrition means something healthy. Assistance means we're paying for it. All right. So SNAP's purpose is to supplement food purchasing in low-income households with the specific aim to improve their nutrition. Excluding foods with no nutritional value from SNAP is consistent with this purpose. SNAP already restricts alcohol and tobacco from purchases. A large and growing body of research shows that SNAP contributes to poor health. SNAP recipients fare worse than other low-income households who do not take the benefits.
Of course.
So without even a consideration of its freedom, the program has now proven to be detrimental to people's health. So we should probably just get rid of it entirely. We wouldn't have to have the debate, the debate over government funding student loans. How about we just don't give student loans?
Exactly.
The government giving money to universities. Oh, we're going to pull it back from the universities that are allowing pro-Hamas protests to occur. We don't have to have the debate over free speech when we just don't give the money at all. It's the most American position you could have.
Exactly. And take any of these programs, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And I think even these, though, when it's government, you have to question immediately, as part of your premise, the good intentions. Are they actually good intentions that they had at the outset? Let's say, for the sake of argument, in the SNAP case, or even the Pell Grant and student loan case, yes, let's just accept it. And I'm willing to say, and I probably could make a strong case that that premise is even false. But just to make our position more difficult to argue, let's accept the premise is true, that it started with good intentions. You said it. In the name of the program, supplemental nutritional assistance. So we want to supplement your nutrition, and we're willing to pay for it out of the coffers of the people, the taxpayers, because we think it will be a benefit for society as a whole to help you. So the premise of it was to be a bridge, was to help people, was to give them a hand up so they could cross the bridge and then get there on their own. But what do we see? And for me, it really came home to roost when I was a cop, because oftentimes the type of people you dealt with were people who lived in government subsidized housing, who had government subsidized, quote unquote, nutritional benefits. Oftentimes they were on government insurance by way of the Social Security office. I remember the one that hit me in the face, this young woman who had just turned 18 within months, and her whole effort and plan and goal was to get onto SSI, and sure enough, she did. What's your critical ailment and the critical problem in your life that you need government insurance, quote unquote insurance, which is just a paycheck? You get a paycheck every month from Social Security on top of all the other quote unquote benefits that you have. The bridge has been destroyed. The government doesn't even want it to be a bridge. And I've said it before, and I've arrived at this conclusion, and I think it's true. These are no longer a subsidized benefit program to help you. They want to keep you enslaved with these programs. That is the goal. And then again, just look at our national debt. We don't need to be putting anything into any of these programs. And if government got out of the way and let the church, let people who have goodwill and good nature just do the thing that they want to do, like give to whatever program or help in whatever way, instead of taking it automatically from them via taxes, we would be in a far better situation than we are. But instead, we're nearly $40 trillion in debt. And you're a bigot if you don't agree.
They create a program which they have to fund. In order to fund that, they have to borrow money, or more likely print money. And when they print money, it causes this thing called inflation, where your dollars become worth less. So when they create the program, they need to get people on it. People get on it, and then they're so keen on being a bureaucracy and growing, they get as many people as they can on it, which necessitates them borrowing more money and printing more money and making your dollars worth less so that more people have to get on the program. And then they grow it more. And then they have to borrow more money and print more money so they can expand the program and makes your dollars worth less. It's almost like a dog chasing its tail. It's almost like it's designed that way. And it's a perfect pivot to this last story that I have. And it's just more of a graphic about price changes since 2000 and to December of 2024. It'll be a little bit hard to see, but I'll describe it. And it's got the most expensive things as they compare to inflation and the least expensive things, and things that have become more affordable and things that become least affordable. And you will notice that there is a direct correlation between whatever government gets involved in and what it stays out of. So by far, since January 2000, so about a quarter of a century, hospital services are 256% more expensive.
Dang.
Now, that is the most expensive. And you will remember, I think we just celebrated the anniversary of Obamacare 15 years ago. And now the prices have necessarily skyrocketed. Also included are college tuition and college textbooks, which are heavily government involved. You have childcare, again, government, medical care, housing, because we had to have the housing crisis, and food and beverages, which are also, again, a lot of government involved. What are the things that they're not involved in as much? I mean, cars with their cafe standards, that's definitely been an issue, but they're private organizations who are trying to bring prices down so that they can compete with each other. So cars, household furnishings, clothing, cell phone services, computers, toys, and TVs. TVs in the last quarter century are down almost 100% price.
Dude,
Which
that's crazy.
holds as we get better at things, best
Mhm.
practices should kick in, prices should come down.
Right. Right. It's almost like if you let the market be free, it will adjust as necessary for itself, because as the market works and flows and companies compete and y- so we do as a supplement, here we go with the language again, as a supplement to our homeschooling curriculum, we read the Tuttle Twins books, which if you don't know what they are, they're essential uh essential doctrines, I guess, to life or living in America. Where our nation came from, how and why, what a free market is, why a global economy or even just a centric economy to your nation, how it works and why. But they're written in a childlike way so children can understand them. And I don't remember the title of this one, but it was about economics, and it was about competition. And so weekly, at least my oldest daughter Gwen, she's 9. She will say we'll see a bank, and then across the street is a bank, or we'll see a McDonald's, and then across the street is a Wendy's, and she'll say, "Are they in competition? Is McDonald's in competition with that restaurant or whatever?" Because she's starting to grasp and understand these basic, elementary institutions to living in society. And when you look at a graph like we just had up there, almost always when you inject government into it, it ends up being worse. The prices skyrocket. The supplements to the healthcare industry, to food and beverage, to all of the things that Steve talked about from that graph. And then when you look at the converse where government isn't involved, it's going down. That's how it's supposed to be. Government, get out of the way.
The power of language, and I'm just occurring to me now with the acronym SNAP, because they have to have all these really catchy acronyms that they can say. Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. At first, I thought they should just give like creatine to people so they get jacked and shredded. But then I thought, hey, you remember when vitamin D was really important to ward off disease? And if you went outside, you would get it, and you were boost your vitamin D, and you're way less likely to contract or at least have negative consequences from a chest cold that necessitated shutting down the entire world and the global economy. Maybe Snap should have just sent out vitamin D to everyone, but then that would have achieved some supplement nutrition assistance. It would have assisted us, and then we wouldn't have needed them anymore.
You're a conspiracy theorist if you think vitamin D can stop COVID, Steve.
No, we need bleach. That was what we have to have. All right. I have palate cleanse about parents and kids. in keeping with my house, my rules. Garrett, final thoughts of the day on the American Radicals podcast.
Yes, sir. We're still grinding in Ephesians 6. And honestly, we could probably do it many, many more times. But I told you guys last time we're trying to come to an end here and move on to something else. But still, the whole armor of God is vastly important for us. And it says in Ephesians 6, starting in verse 10, finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand firm. Stand therefore, having fastened on the belt of truth, and having put on the breastplate of righteousness, and as shoes for your feet, having put on the readiness given by the gospel of peace. In all circumstances, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming darts of the evil one, and take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God, praying at all times in the Spirit with all prayer and supplication. To that end, keep alert with all perseverance, making supplication for all the saints, and also for me, that words may be given to me in opening my mouth boldly to proclaim the mystery of the gospel, for which I am an ambassador in chains, that I may declare it boldly as I ought to speak. Then we'll go over here and listen to another couple minutes from Pastor James Coates.
And just draw on the imagery of a soldier for a moment. This demands executing the orders of the commanding officer. Who's the commanding officer? It's the Lord Jesus Christ. We are soldiers for Christ. And we have a commanding officer. And he is the one that sends in the orders. And when the orders come, we don't get to modify the order. We don't get to tweak the order, adjust even the method. We have a responsibility to execute the order as given. And so when it comes to obedience, we don't get to pick the hills we die on. We don't get to decide when it's time to obey. We're called to obey. And as we obey, the hill picks us. Christ picks the hill. We just obey. We stand firm. And so this is calling for obedience, the cultivation of practical righteousness on the ground of the imputed righteousness of Christ. We need to follow through.
Oh, of course we get an ad. All right, that's good enough, because Steve and I, we've talked about this before. We've talked about obedience and how we don't get to pick the hill and how the hill picks us. And I know during this period of our life, there have been times for Steve and I both and our families where we are fighting against that order. We are not wanting to take that hill. We're wanting to disobey because it's hard, it's difficult. We think we might know better. But when it comes to that imagery that he talked about and how we have to follow the commanding officer that is the Lord Jesus Christ, for me, it brings me to a peaceful point, because I know it's true. I know it's right. And I know that he picked the hill. And this is the hill that we're on. We're still on the hill. We're still fighting the battle. And we're going to continue to. And thank you for all of you who join us and fight the battle alongside us.
And along the lines of the way we started, kids coming out of spring break, I think that a nice parent-child, father-son moment is worth sending us off just to smile today.
That's awesome.
Pretty good. Guy's a good server to pull that off.
Yeah.
Man. It was impressive. All right. So that's going to do it for us today on the American Radicals podcast. If you haven't already, guys, make sure that you do give us a thumbs up on this episode. Follow the program if you haven't already. We'll be back with you Thursday, 10:30 Eastern time here, rumble.com/AmRadPod. Until then, have a great day.
You've been listening to the Voice of the Suspendables on the American Radicals podcast. Follow us on rumble.com/AmRadPod.